In the United States, we are familiar with the phrase innocent until proven guilty, that defendants are given the presumption of innocent, that it's up to prosecutors to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But what does the system afford alleged victims of crime? Well, that's what's behind Marsy's Law. I'm Tiffany Cloud. Welcome to The Storm, and thank you for watching today on WYLN TV 35. Marsy's Law is named for Marcy Nicholas, a California college student who was murdered in 1983 by her ex-boyfriend. Just days following her murder, her mother and brother were confronted by the accused murderer in the grocery store. Marsy's family had not been notified that he had been released on bail. The offender continued to harass the family until he was found guilty and sentenced. So Marsy's Law is meant to provide constitutional rights for victims. Now you may be wondering, how is this any different from existing victims' rights laws in Pennsylvania? What are the questions for potential concerns with Marsy's Law being adopted in Pennsylvania? That's what I'll be discussing today with Luzerne County District Attorney Stefanie Salavantis right after the break. Welcome back to The Storm. I'm delighted today to be joined by the Luzerne County District Attorney Stefanie Salavantis, and we are going to discuss Marsy's Law. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, as always, for having me.
Happy to have you here. This is a really interesting topic to me. You know, I've done a lot of shows about domestic abuse, about violent crimes, shows about harassment, and I've had a lot of people talk about being the victims of crime. But I don't think I've ever really done a show about a law to protect victims of crime per se. So right. This entire topic intrigues me. In the show opening, I did explain the background of Marsy's Law, who was named after the murdered woman in 1983, whose ex-boyfriend, who was accused of the crime, was let out on bail and ended up basically harassing her family. And they worked to implement this in California, and now it's being spread across other states. So I'm going to have you give us a bit of a history to start out about where we are with this law and implementation in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and where else it's popping up as interesting. What other states?
Well, this is a very important topic to me. As you know, as district attorney, one of my main goals in the office is to make sure that our victims know that they're being heard. And that's what Marsy's Law is all about. It's making sure that the victims have a voice. And so it's been a national movement. As you stated, I think there are 35 states that have Marsy's Law so far, working hard to make sure that the other states are moving in the same direction, Pennsylvania being one of them. Right now, we have gone through 2 consecutive sessions, passing both the House and the Senate, and it is going to be on the ballot in November 5th, for the general election, for our voters to decide if Marsy's Law should become a constitutional right for victims, crime victims, letting crime victims have a stronger voice.
Okay, so I want to start out by saying, what exactly does, or asking this question, what exactly does Marsy's Law do?
Marsy's Law, right now, so people understand a little more about this. Crime victims have statutory rights. They have a right to be heard. They have a right to be notified. They have a right for restitution. They have all these statutory rights. However, they do not have a remedy if those rights are not upheld. With Marsy's Law, it provides them constitutional rights. They have more of a voice when it comes to their rights being violated. So that's why the focus here is making sure that those who are accused or convicted of committing a crime are on the same footing as victims, keeping them on, having them have the same balanced rights here. And that is the whole purpose of Marsy's Law, that they both have constitutional rights and one isn't stronger than the other.
Now, one of the things that maybe someone who is against this whole idea might say is, but if you're supposed to give a presumption of innocence to a defendant, doesn't a victim being given rights automatically kind of imply or assume that the defendant's guilty?
No, I don't think that is the case at all. Again, it goes back to, if we're providing these rights to those who offend, those who are accused of committing these crimes, we should be giving the same rights to our victims. Those who are thrown into a system, they don't choose to be involved in the criminal justice system. It's only because a crime has been committed against them. We need to make sure that we're protecting them, that they have that voice, and if they aren't provided that voice in the system, then they have rights.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because another question would be, isn't Pennsylvania's current Victims' Bill of Rights sufficient protection for victims of crime?
Well, no, because statutory, going back to, we right now have statutory rights. Victims have their statutory rights, and it's going back to the right to be notified, the right to be heard, the right to be present in court. However, they do not have constitutional rights. So when you're talking to someone, you want to say constitutional rights are here, statutory rights are here. We want to make it even. We want to bring them to the same footing with our defendants, those accused of committing crimes or convicted of committing crimes, and make it that they have other rights if they aren't provided that notice. They aren't provided a right to be heard in court, for example.
Okay, I'm glad you explained it that way. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as explaining the difference between statutory and constitutional,
right,
especially for those of us, myself included, who are not lawyers and don't necessarily understand that ranking.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's how I go around and I try to explain it to people, and it's just that simple. As they state, if you want something to be confusing, just have a lawyer explain it. So that's I try to help people understand it better.
Okay. Now, one of the questions I also have for you, are there any concerns of those who, again, are questioning the implementation of this, that perhaps, is it going down a slippery slope? Could there ever be where a victim's rights start to trump a defendant's rights?
No. Again, it goes back to that the balanced level, balanced footing that we're putting our victims as well as those who are accused or convicted of a crime. They will always have the same level of rights. One does not trump the other. And if there is ever a point that maybe a conflict comes up in court between the rights of the victim or the accused, the judge will decide on how to balance those rights. So there will never be a point where a victim has stronger rights than the accused.
Okay. One of the topics you and I often discuss when you've been on the show, the many, many times you've been on the show, is just the efficiency of courts and making sure that things are moving through the system efficiently. Right. Will the victim's rights being taken to a constitutional level, will that cause any kind of, for prosecutors like yourself and others across the Commonwealth, will that cause any kind of slowdown in the prosecution process, do you think?
I do not foresee that at all.
Okay.
In Luzerne County, and I will say in the majority, if not close to all counties in Pennsylvania, we already abide by the statutory rights of the victims. So our office is already providing notice to our victims. We're already sitting down with them and discussing what the potential plea may be, if they are on board with the plea, if we're going to trial, what this means to them, if we have a sentencing, making sure that they're heard at the sentencing. Things like that are already taking place in our court system. So I do not foresee any delay. I know that there have been, as I stated earlier, 35 other states have passed Marsy's Law, and we do not see a delay, any change in their court system as well. So moving forward, I just want to make sure people know I do not foresee it, and I know other DAs across the state are 100% on board with this. And let me tell you, if it meant delays in our court system, that wouldn't be the case.
Okay, fair enough. And with that, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back on The Storm. Welcome back to The Storm. I'm joined by Luzerne County District Attorney Stefanie Salavantis, and we are discussing Marsy's Law, which is looking to be put on the ballot this November.
Yes.
In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and the entire idea of it is to give victims constitutional rights so that they have more equal rights to that of a defendant.
Correct.
Okay. It's interesting, before Marsy's Law, in all these shows, as I said in the last segment that I've done about victims of crime, I haven't spent a lot of time talking about the rights of victims of crime. So it's interesting that this whole discussion about Marsy's Law is really making people across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania more aware of it.
I agree. The best part about this campaign to amend our Constitution to allow victims constitutional rights, the most important part is the education. As a district attorney, we are constantly trying to tell victims what their rights are, sending out notices, but they're not fully informed as to exactly what their rights are. And right now, the main campaign is letting them know what their rights are and what they can do, how strong their voice is when it comes to being in court and standing up for themselves and their family members. So I think it's such a positive endeavor, and I hope that people go out November 5th and they vote yes to support this constitutional amendment.
Okay, and it's always intriguing to me to see what's going on in terms of the legislature, because Marsy's Law really does have a lot of broad and bipartisan support from elected officials, from law enforcement, prosecutors such as yourself, victim services community. I'm just going to rattle off some. The governor, Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro, the Office of the Victim's Advocate, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association, the Pennsylvania State Troopers Association, the Pennsylvania Chiefs of Police Association, the Pennsylvania City Council, and also, it's overwhelmingly supported by Pennsylvania voters across party lines. After hearing a full explanation of Marsy's Law, 87% of voters support the measure per a survey that was done this past January. It's nice to hear bipartisan. We don't hear that often these days.
And it makes me smile. Mm-hmm. It's so nice to hear how many people come out and support this. When I sit and talk to people about it, the first thing I say is I don't understand why someone would be against it, why someone would say, no, I don't think victims of crime victims should have these rights, should have these protections. That shouldn't be coming out of someone's mouth. We should make sure that crime victims and those accused of committing crimes and convicted of committing crimes have the same rights when it comes to our system.
Well, and I always like to think about exactly what you just said is, why would anybody be against this? So I was trying to think about, well, what might someone say? And would one of the questions be, well, is it going to be costly for a victim to have constitutional rights? Who's paying for the cost to implement?
Well, if there is any cost, it's minimal, if any cost at all, because again, we're already implementing and making sure that we are following the statutory rights of the victims, making sure that we are abiding by that. So we are already out there notifying the victims as we go through every step of their case, sitting down with them, talking to them, making sure that they know if there is a plea coming up, getting their input, letting them talk to the judge based on what that crime has done to them and their life. So I don't see a cost that would affect, especially Luzerne County, that would affect Luzerne County at all, if there would be any cost to implementing Marsy's Law.
Okay. You just made me think about something, which is victims' rights. It's very broad. It's very broad. So can you kind of help me walk through a hypothetical scenario that if I were a victim of crime, what are my rights?
Well, if a crime was committed against you and charges are filed against an individual for that crime. Let's say, for example, a rape. You were raped. as we go through the process, law enforcement and the district attorney's office regularly work with the victim to help them understand the system, help them understand what steps they're going to go through to get to a trial or a plea, and that we are there for them. We notify them of every step of the way, and making sure that if they have restitution, that we are making sure that they're reimbursed and made whole, that if we are going in front of a judge for sentencing, that they can explain to the judge what exactly that did to them, how that changed their life, and really working also with them after the fact. If an individual is sent to prison and has the potential to be paroled, making sure that they are put into the state system of notifying them of a potential release of the defendant, and making sure that, again, that they are just notified every step of the way. And if there is ever a point where they feel that they aren't being heard, they have a right to stand up and say something. And that is what's important about Marsy's Law. It gives them that power. It gives them that right to have a stronger voice in the system.
There is, though, personal accountability with this also, because it sounds to me as though the person who is the victim, they need to know to assert his or her rights.
But there are a lot of people that don't want to assert their rights. I will say that, where we notify them as soon as a case comes into our office. We immediately notify them, introduce ourselves to them as our office and our victims coordinators do, and say, if there is ever a time that you want to reach out, please call us. We will keep you updated. If you choose to not be notified, you could call us and let us know. That's us trying to tell them, you have a right to be part of this process. A lot of people choose, for some reason or another, that they don't want to be notified every step of the way, and it may be that it just opens old wounds that they don't want to relive. There could be many reasons, but those who want to assert their rights, they have that they are allowed to do that, and that allows us to continue communicating with them, making sure that we are providing them as much notice throughout the whole system as possible, and knowing that we're there for them.
Right. Okay, and we're going to go to break right now. We'll be right back on The Storm. Welcome back to The Storm. We're talking about Marsy's Law, which is going to be on this November's ballot. One of the things I do want to bring to the audience's attention, we are pulling up the website, which is marsyslawforpa.com, throughout the show. They are also very active on Twitter, so you can go to the website, you can go to social media, you can hear stories and read stories of people who would have been positively affected were Marsy's Law in place, people who have been positively affected in states where Marsy's Law is in place. In the last segment, we were talking about benefits for victims, and there was one more that you told me at break you wanted to bring up.
Well, I think one of the most common complaints I get from victims is the unnecessary delays and time that victims have to put into coming and appearing in front of the court, and being a part of the trial itself and the case, their case. And I think it's important to emphasize that with Marsy's Law and these rights for victims, that they have a voice, that for so long they felt that no one was listening to them, that they're going to court and they're taking day after day off of work, and continuance after continuance is granted, and they just feel that they're being re-victimized through the system. And so with Marsy's Law, that provides them a better protection, gives them that voice to say enough is enough. And I think that's a very important part that we need to emphasize as well.
And that is a really interesting point you raise about the feeling being re-victimized, because we often hear that, for example, in rape cases, where women, they have to relive the whole thing, and it's always flipped, and they're turned into, character assassination, all the things that they have to go through, and it's a horrible process of re-victimization.
Right, it is, and when prosecutors have to sit and they prepare victims and witnesses for the trials and to testify, it's really an emotional thing for them. And to, after doing that, have a continuance granted and have to do it again months later, and they have to go through it all again, and it just keeps re-victimizing them. We need to end that cycle. We need to give them a stronger voice. And going back to what you said with the website, people need to go onto Twitter, people need to go onto these sites and tell us their stories, tell us how they have been affected by the system and how it will positively change someone else's life if we change our Constitution, amend our Constitution to provide these better rights to our victims.
I really appreciate you coming on the show, District Attorney Salavantis. Just to close out the show, I want to recap a couple of things. So again, the website is marcyslawforpa.com. Marcy's Law for Pennsylvania is a grassroots effort seeking to amend the state constitution to provide victims of crime equal rights that are already afforded to the accused and convicted. While the accused and convicted have numerous rights codified in the Pennsylvania Constitution, crime victims have only statutory protections. Marcy's Law for Pennsylvania elevates the statutory and common law rights afforded to crime victims in Pennsylvania. And some of the things that it will give them the right to do is receive information about their rights and available services, receive notification of proceedings or major developments in a criminal case, receive timely notifications and changes to the offender's custodial status, be present at court proceedings, provide input to the prosecutor before a plea agreement is finalized, be heard at plea, sentencing proceedings, or any process that may result in the offender's release, and restitution, which were among the things the district attorney brought up. Thank you so much for coming on the shore. It'll be interesting to see how the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania vote in November. I know you want them to vote for Marcy's Law.
Yes, I do. I hope they do.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Don't complain about it. You can do something about it. You can vote. Thank you for watching.